Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an exciting set of terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into these encounters, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. All of these links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that really don't fit on this channel. And I started a GoFundMe page to help pay for tuition to keep my daughter in the school she was attending. I had a 2-month legal battle to get full custody of her. I win it. Then the school that she has attended since kindergarten, she's now in 6th, tells me that she is no longer able to go there because I live across a bridge, a county line, and I've actually said that I would be willing to move and this and that, but the supervisor and the assistant supervisor or superintendents are forcing me to pay tuition, or she is going to go to this city school. She definitely would not fit in, and it would absolutely crush her. She's been through enough, so right now I am doing everything in my power to get that tuition paid so she does not have to go through any more bullshit. If that's anything that you're willing to help with, that link is also in the description below. Now I've taken enough of your time, guys. Let's get on with today's encounters. Shall we? Today's first encounter. I'm from Roswell, New Mexico, born and raised. I grew up dealing with the bullcrap alien nonsense my entire life. I'm a very logical thinker and have had many strange things happen to me in the past, but have always dealt with them, and this can be logically explained, mine says, since I can remember. But what I'm about to tell you right now is something I can't explain, and is also something I'm hesitant to even think about anymore. I was camping with my cousin Cam, 17 at the time, same age as I was, his little brother Nick, 13, and my aunt and uncle. We are near Cloud Croft, New Mexico, up in the mountains, Lincoln National Forest. My uncle had just bought a new camper, and we decided to go camping with it for the weekend. The weather was beautiful, and me and my cousins decided to bring a tent to sleep in instead of the camper so we could be in peace. We set up our tent about 60 yards away from the camper and the fire that was right outside of it. Towards the end of the first night, and after a long day of exploring, we all decided to lie down for the night. We weren't camping on an actual campsite. It was a spot my uncle had found some years back, and it was a perfect spot to set up camp. At about 3 a.m., the fire was completely out. My cousins and I were still awake. Nick, being the youngest, was trying to stay up to be cool with us, but ended up falling asleep. It was only Cam and myself awake now, and we were just shooting the shit, talking about girls from school, brilliant ideas for things that need to be invented, and eventually, slowly, starting to fall asleep as well. All of a sudden, we heard this blood-curdling scream from a distance, probably the same distance away the camper was, only in the opposite direction. Me and Cam both picked our heads up off of our pillow and said almost simultaneously, "What the heck was that?" It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a fox, it was big. The closest way I know how to describe it is a mixture between a banshee and a rabid peacock. Its voice was deep and echoed through the woods. It let out another blood-curdling shriek, and we both sat up on our blown-up mattress. Immediately after the screech, it started clicking, an odd, deep clicking sound coming from the back of its throat. It was loud enough to hear from a distance as well. We were scared, and neither of us had any idea of what it could be. We waited a second, both quiet as a mouse. It let out another scream, followed by a series of clicks. but it seemed closer now, maybe 10 yards closer. I looked at Cam, and he just looked just as shocked as I was feeling. I was trying to convince myself it was a bird of some sort or a mountain cat. Then I heard it walking. It was walking on 2 feet, and I could distinctly hear it. It even sounded big, taking huge strides, cracking branches and leaves under its feet as it walked. It sounded like it was coming close to us. It shrieked, click loudly again, and I could tell it was about halfway to us now. Suddenly another scream and click came from another direction, sounding just as close as the other creature. It sounded more aggressive, more angry and dominant. The first creature let off a series of clicks as well. Then it hit me. They're communicating. At this point, I'm terrified. So is my cousin. I had an axe under my blown-up mattress, but I was too afraid to go under and grab it. Then both the creatures started walking towards us, both on 2 legs, not screaming or clicking, but it sounded like they were trying to sneak up on our tent. They were getting closer and closer. The first one screamed loudly. I could tell it was roughly 15 yards away now, and so was the other one. After screaming, it started clicking again, and the other one clicked back at it. They were both walking closer and closer to the tent. I could hear them both stepping on limbs and leaves, but I could feel the ground thud with each step they took. I was panicking, frantically looking for my axe, while Cam was frantically trying to wake up his little brother. I couldn't find my axe anywhere. I realized I had left it near the campfire because we were using it to cut pieces of wood for the fire. Nick wasn't waking up, and they were getting closer and closer to the tent. Eventually, Cam and I froze. The second one had stopped about 10 feet away from the tent, but the first one was walking right up to the tent. As soon as it was right outside of our tent, I yelled as loud as I could out of pure fear, "Get the heck away from us and leave us alone!" It stopped. It was right outside. I could almost see it through the tent. It was huge, tall enough to lean over and look through the top of the tent if it wanted to. I could tell it was slim, humanoid, and heavy. I could feel its energy, and it was very negative. I felt the vibes of the universe, and they were telling me that whatever these things were, they weren't here just to say hi or steal our hot dogs. I was frozen. They were right outside, and the moon was covered by clouds, so moonlight was no longer shining anywhere. I couldn't even hear it breathing. It was silent. The second one clicked from behind us, still 10 feet away from the tent. The first one didn't move. It didn't make a single sound, and it was probably a foot away from the tent. My heart was beating so hard, I thought I was going to pass out. All of a sudden, it took 2 huge steps back, and the second one let out a scream so loud it hurt my ears. I immediately burst into tears. The second creature took off into the woods, pounding the ground underneath it, running on 2 legs. The first one apparently turned around and walked away back into the deep woods. I waited until I could completely heard the footsteps disappear, until I unzipped the tent and I threw little Nick over my shoulder and booked it towards the camper. We got inside and woke up our aunt and uncle. They had no idea what was going on and urged us to take our asses to bed. We slept in the camper the next 2 nights, and I didn't leave the campsite for the rest of the trip. I don't know what we encountered that night, but all I know is it was not an animal, and it was definitely not a human. It wasn't a bear or a 4-legged animal, and it scared me ever since. And its energy and screams still haunt me to this day. I give you my word, it's very real. I didn't find any proof to back up our story. However, one thing I did find really strange was the fact there was this huge rock at the end of a trail near our campsite that was absolutely covered in moss. The last day we were there, all of the moss on the rock was gone. I couldn't even recognize the rock until little Nick said something about it. The rock looked like it had been licked clean, not literally, but there wasn't any sign that moss had ever grown there in the first place. Just 2 days prior, the moss, when it was so thick, it felt like a couch cushion. Today's second encounter. In September of 1978, I lived with my father on a farm in the vicinity of Cheyenne, Wisconsin, which is very near the Menominee. Tonight's second encounter. In September of 1978, I lived with my father on a farm in the vicinity of Cheyenne, Wisconsin, which is near the Menominee Indian Reservation. There had been some buzz within the community of an unknown, large, hairy creature spotted by two deer hunters not far from our farm. I had heard stories of the Mano-Baywalk, or hairy giants, from stories told by the Menominee, but I just considered these tales to be legends. One evening, my father and I were coming home from the store and noticed what appeared to be two hairy creatures collecting squash from the garden. Each creature was at least 6 feet tall. It was dusk, but there was enough light to clearly see what they were doing. My father immediately cut the headlights and stopped the car as we just sat there and watched them pick and eat squash. After about 5 minutes, one of the creatures looked in our direction, and you could see its eyes glow red from the moonlight. We started to get scared and decided to make a dash for the house and call the police. Then suddenly a huge disc-shaped object appeared above us and slowly moved towards the east field, which is about 200 yards from us, and landed. I estimate the craft was about 40 feet in diameter. A large sliding door opened immediately, and a foggy green light glowed from within the craft. After a few seconds, the door closed, the craft slowly rose and shot off towards the north. Then we noticed the creatures were gone. A few days later, our neighbors from down the road came over for dinner. After we had finished eating, my father and Mr. Kane walked outside. After an hour or so, the neighbors left, and I started to clean up the kitchen. Later that evening, I was watching TV in the living room. My father walked in, turned the TV off, and sat down beside me. He told me that Mr. Kane and his sister witnessed one of the crafts on the same night that we had our encounter. As well, they witnessed several of the large, hairy creatures meandering through the nearby woods. Mr. Kane said that he knew something had been in the woods for several weeks, but never got a good look until the craft arrived. After that night, we never had another encounter, or did we hear of any more sightings by any people in the area. Today's third encounter. During the Christmas break in grad school in December of 1983, January of 1984, I was part of an Everest trek. We weren't going to the summit. Basically, we hiked from a small mountain town airstrip to the base camp at the Khumbu Glacier, where the real climbers took off from. It takes 10 days or so each way, with stops at monasteries along the way to adjust to the altitude. It was winter in Nepal, so most of the higher elevations were basically deserted. It was very cold and rocky up there, not very inviting, but starkly beautiful. The pack train had gone ahead to set camp up, and we each just hiked along at our own pace until we caught up at the end of the day. It was mid-afternoon, and as I rounded a sharp corner on a tiny, narrow mountain ledge trail, I encountered a creature standing on the trail in front of an ice fall. It was clearly a primate of some sort, not really huge, between 3 to 4 feet, thick reddish hair like an orangutan with long arms. We just sort of looked at one another for about 10 seconds, and then it turned, climbed up an ice fall, maybe 25 feet, and vanished over the top. I didn't really feel threatened by it at all, but was very impressed by its speed and agility as it zoomed up the sheer ice face and was gone. It didn't seem to be startled or fleeing, it just moved on. It left me unplussed for a few minutes, but eventually I resumed hiking. When I told our Sherpa guide about it, he said it was a Yeti. Although his English was spotty, I got the impression there was a range of animals they considered to be a Yeti, not just the Johnny Quest type abominable snowman we talk about over here. So whatever else is up there, at least in the early 80s, there were smallish apes with excellent climbing skills. Tonight's fourth encounter. Within the past 2 or 3 years, I put pieces together from my childhood and concluded that a creature we all feared when we were kids, which we simply named the thing in the woods, was in fact a Bigfoot. There were just too many similarities and too many incidences and descriptions that I've heard from researchers and eyewitness accounts. I also looked up sighting reports and couldn't believe it when I saw that my area, western Pennsylvania, was a literal hotbed of activity. And when I spoke with others, having something like this lurking in your home area is terrifying, especially for kids. I remember these occurrences really didn't start happening until I was around 11 and my sister was 8. I remember when we first acknowledged our thing to a couple of our cousins when they were visiting for a day. We were sitting on my Graham's porch, who lived next door to us in a rural area. It was going to start getting dark in about an hour or so, and we started getting nervous. Our cousins kept asking why we were saying we had to go down home and be in before dark. When we finally told them that there was something that would come through the woods after dark and sounded like a freight train and broke tree branches, and I guess this was a vital clue, that it stunk awful. The best way to describe it then was like burning rubber. That's when my older cousin very calmly, by matter of fact, simply said, "Oh, well, it sounds like you have the thing in the woods here as well." We were shocked and asked what he meant. He recalled a story he had heard his dad and uncle talking about to their wives the previous hunting season. About 2 or 3 hours from our place this was. They always went deer hunting and, in the summer, went fishing. They had this little tin trailer they bought for the property that was about a couple of hours from their homes. They had it for only about 3 years. He said that this past hunting season they cut their trip early, coming home after about 3 days. And they got home at some crazy hour in the morning because they had left in the middle of the night to come home. Their reason was the fouling. My cousin said his dad and uncle had been up at the camp and everything seemed normal at first, though it seemed that there were few deer that season. Population changed, so they didn't think anything of it. The first night they were there, one of them thought they had heard some tree breaks while he was relieving himself, but thought nothing of it since there are bear up there as well. Trees can break naturally and fall. That night they slept well, but when they left in the morning, they saw some odd pine cones and a couple of small rocks around their trailer. They couldn't figure out where it came from. The second night, they both heard pinging off the roof in the back of the trailer that sounded like really heavy big hail. It only happened randomly, but was enough to pique their interest. They looked outside, didn't see anything. They commented that it smelled something awful, like a skunky type of smell. It was my cousin's uncle that said it reminded him of burning tires on asphalt in the heat of a summer. That's why when we said that, it tipped my cousin off. Outside the next morning, they found more rocks behind the trailer. They climbed the ladder to the roof, and there were rocks on top of it as well. This definitely perplexed them, but they thought maybe it was some stupid kids messing with them. So they hunted that day, and the final night they were talking and listening to see if something else would happen. Sure enough, they heard some large rocks hitting the back of the trailer. They went out with their guns and yelled whoever it was to stop, that they had the right to protect their property, and they would do so. But the rocks kept coming. They went back out and smelled that awful odor again, very strong at that point. Then they heard what they described as a loud, powerful snap on the backside of the trailer. Now they're mad. They ran out again with their guns to confront the pranksters. They said that all they saw was a dent in the trailer, and as they panned their flashlight, they caught a glimpse of something large taking off through the tree line. They said it had dark fur, like a bear, but they both said they saw it running upright like a person. They knew no one in a fake suit could move that stealthily or put that dent in the side wall of the trailer. They went inside and one of them said, "We just saw a friggin' Bigfoot." They packed up their things and left within the hour, feeling very threatened. That was the last time they ever went to the property. So something terrified these lifelong hunter woodsmen into giving up something they loved. Hearing that story made me a believer. We were terrified all through growing up of the thing in the woods. Even to this day, after more recent encounters, I'm just as scared and won't go out there at night. And what truly solidified my belief that Bigfoot were around here was when I started to live with my ex, not living there now because he had passed unexpectedly. He insisted there were Bigfoot coming around the property. He had weird habits as well, which made me feel he was serious. He was a very well-respected Army vet and active-duty policeman. Well, I told you I had some good encounters for this evening. Now, as we all know, Pennsylvania is a hot spot for Dogman and Bigfoot as well. I'm starting to notice trend is the right word, but wherever there's Bigfoot, there's Dogman, and wherever there's Dogman, there's Bigfoot. I'm almost thinking maybe the two of them don't really cohabitate together, like in the same vicinity, or they do in the same vicinity, but not in the same, dwellings. But I think they kind of coexist amongst each other, kind of maybe as protection from humanity. Who knows? But definitely a cool encounter. As an adult, this person is piecing together parts of their childhood that terrified her growing up. And, I know what it's like having property that you love, and to have to give it up you must have been terrified. I mean, those two hunters, kind of remind, just like my dad, my uncle, take seeing something like that to scare my dad and my uncle away. But yeah, definitely cool. And I'm almost like their campsite had been there for a couple of years. I'm wondering why the Sasquatch chose to that year mess with these guys. It's a little interesting and kind of piques my interest. The third encounter, maybe that was a juvenile Yeti or juvenile snow Sasquatch or abominable snowman, 3 to 4 feet. Who knows? Maybe, we don't know. I don't know. Let me speak for myself. I don't know anything about Nepal, so only what I've read. So maybe they do have some dwarfed Bigfoot over there. But I'm thinking maybe it was a juvenile and kind of was interested in what these guys were doing, and just wanted to watch them and got caught, and he kind of quickly vamoosed. So definitely another cool encounter. The encounter in Wisconsin is very interesting. You've got a couple of cryptids, hairy cryptids, bipedal, and a flying saucer, or UFO. I hate that term, flying saucer. I always think of like my great aunt with her tea and her saucers. But I'm almost thinking, with all the reading and stuff I've been doing with like Skinwalker Ranch, researching that, and I'm getting in deep, and I'm coming up with some crazy ideas. But that's for another day. I'm wondering if these are some sort of, I'm gonna sound stupid, but hairy bipedal alien, or if the craft actually had no, nothing to do with the cryptids being there. So who knows? I mean, maybe it was a Dogman, maybe it was a Bigfoot, maybe it was a bipedal hairy alien. Who knows? But definitely interesting. And interesting is cool. So the first encounter I narrated a couple years ago, about almost 2 years ago. And I love that encounter. And I included it because of the second encounter. The first encounter, you're in Roswell, we all know, is the capital, besides Area 51, for U.F.O'S. You have this two cryptids, almost similar to the Wisconsin, but these are screaming and sending clicks. And I'm wondering if these clicks that they're making is almost like sonar, like a bat, like judging distance and this and that. And they're communicating with the screams. The clicks have just like a depth, kind of like a depth perception, maybe. I'm not really sure. I hope you guys like these encounters as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. Once again, I want to apologize for the way I sound. I think with all the stress that I'm going through right now has got me kind of feeling like shit. It was another crappy day with the superintendent and assistant superintendent. Right now it seems like the only thing I can do, because I did, a lot of people said call or get a hold of the school board. The school board in my area are a bunch of stay-home moms that put together cookie sales and field trips and everything else. So I actually called the New York State Board of Education, and I'm waiting for a call back. I'm going to try to be as optimistic as possible, but it seems like right now the only thing to do to keep her in the school that she had grown up in is to pay the tuition. I'm only guessing that they will kind of cut it down, prorate it. So I'm not really sure. But anyway, I did start a GoFundMe if that's anything that you guys are willing to help with. And I'm going to put out an upload every day, because even though I feel like crap, I feel a little bit less weight on my shoulders now that I got to narrate a couple of encounters. Tomorrow night, I've got some amazing police tales. Tales from policemen and their encounters with bipedal, hairy, cryptid, Dogman, and Bigfoot. So I hope you guys tune in for that. And with that, I'm going to bid you guys farewell.